Okay, welcome back to our symposium. You can still see our graphic recording, part one. This will also be part of the documentation of this symposium, so we will now remove that again, but keep it for our documentation. Thanks a lot to the speakers and discussants of our first part. We're now entering into the second one, which is about affordability and new forms of housing. When speaking about new social housing, which is the main theme and the title of the IBA Vienna, the question of affordability is, of course, always in the core of the discussion, and of course, more or less present in all of the projects of IBA Vienna. And again, I would like to ask Kurt Hofstetter first for his introduction of the topic alongside a few examples from IBA Vienna.
Yeah, thank you. I come back to the topic of affordability in new forms of housing. We talked about affordability as a difficult term, or payability, because it's hard to define. You have to decide what are you willing to afford, or what are you able to afford. It's different levels of talking about it. For example, many can afford two cars in their household, but have a problem to afford the housing costs or a garage. So it doesn't really match. We have to see that. Coming back to this slide I showed in the beginning, it needs protection, and a major pillar for protection is protection for affordability is protection against speculation. So to fund the objects instead of people who have to pay then to the private investor is one of the main pillars. So if I come back to a few examples in IBA Vienna about affordability, I'm sure that Martin Orner later will go more into detail from the perspective of a developer. I just want to come back to this special project of temporary housing that we have two examples. One is, so the left one, Home 21, is a stable construction that does not care too much about the kind of use. It's good for housing, it's good for office, it's good for production, even for a garage. So this is a very, from the architectural point, it's an interesting point of how to access this topic. From the social and affordability point of view, of course, it also raises questions. In the moment, there is housing limited for 10 years, and it's mainly housing for people who need support, who get support, coming from different situations or from other countries, and who kind of get support to get access to the normal housing market, also the normal subsidized housing market. So for this group of people, that is a very good way to land in the city, to get started, to get support. But as we see, the house itself doesn't care which kind of use it contains. The other one, Portaxki Gasse, is completely different because it's really constructed for housing. It's a timber wood construction with modules, 4 stories high, and you can reconstruct it for 3 times and put it, re-erect it on a different place within 40 years. So that's very interesting for us, because the original purpose to provide housing when it's needed and where it's needed at the moment can be fulfilled several times on different locations. We are really interested to see first time when it has to be brought to another space. We already think about it and talk about it, where could that be, and to see how does it work. The costs were quite low, in fact, but also as it's temporary housing, not all the regulations had to be fulfilled. It's completely dignified, full quality housing, and it's interesting to see also how can you deal with the question of qualities on the construction and architectural level. I also would like to come back to Wolfganggasse, where we have this single parents project for the first time in a big style. And I would like to go into the topic of flexibility a little bit, because we can see it on various other developments and projects, different kinds of access this topic. Like here, it's maybe a little small. I don't know if you can really see it. It's three different approaches to flexibility. One is day-night. So how can you just make a special space within your apartment that's just ready for night if you open a couch or not. The other one is using double space, which is very normal in the old built city because the rooms are much higher. So you need a special height in your construction. And the third attempt is additional room flexibility. So maybe a sliding wall, maybe curtains, something you can just change. Now we saw in the lockdown phase in spring how difficult it is if more than one person has to work from home and use what just like we do now here, use online conversations, and it's almost not possible if you don't have extra rooms or extra at least areas that are separate and you really can work. But that's only one example. It's just very, very obvious because now everybody had the experience. Many people have to live like this for a long time, and it's their daily life. So what it really brings is just new ways to look at it in social housing, like this kind, making a room that could be your music room, could be for a child, could be your office, and you can always open it again or different ways. So this is a special project that's also part of IBA Vienna. We have a nice model for that as well in our exhibition, where you can kind of change and try find out how the same scope of the flat can be changed very easily to completely different results. And another approach is like this: you have three flats and just a single one, and the middle one is the children's flat. So parents who do not live together could care for the children from both sides. That's maybe not a general plan for many, but it's very interesting for people who would like to live like that. And it's also already just now developed in Donaufeld an der Schanze in a special project where it really will be tried out, and we will see how is the result and is it really something that can be done more in the future. So I keep my presentation brief because we know that we'll have a lot of discussions. Last point has to do with affordability. We should never forget that housing is a human right, not just a word. It's really written down, and we have different documents on an international level where it's written down. And when we look at the discussions on the European level, this is one of the reasons why we come back to housing for all again and again. We can see that the cities know extremely well what they need, and on the national level, it's not always the case. So this is why we have this discussion on the European level that subsidized housing might be a threat to the freedom of competition and things like that. So if you look at the topic of housing as a human right and you really read about it, it should help to clear the view again and to focus our activities on this topic. Thank you. This was my little input.
Thank you. May I ask you to just answer one additional question which came up in the first part from Dublin? It was a rather technical question about the general funding scheme in Vienna. And it goes, do you actually subsidize land costs or construction costs or both?
It's both. And in many cases, it's more the land. I think the colleague from Munich, Nathalie Schaller, said something about how you have not a choice in Munich, for example, if it's subsidized or not. In fact, it's the same in Vienna, because there is no competition. If you want to build a subsidized project, you need to have the land before, because you wouldn't get it for a price to build a subsidized housing project there. This is why we have a fund, Wohn for Wien, who is working since 35 years on this topic and saving land and making it accessible for the non-profit or limited profit associations. They then can provide subsidized housing. Otherwise, there is no chance.
Thank you very much, Kurt, for answering this question. Also, thank you for another introduction and a digital tour through IBA projects. I want to mention here that tomorrow in the afternoon at 3:40, we will hear Karin Zahner-Lohmeier on Housing for All, as you have also just mentioned the initiative and mentioned how important it is, especially in the context of IBA Vienna. Also, thank you for mentioning the topic of flexibility. Also, this one is especially against the background of today's situation with being flexible and home office, etc. Also a topic that we should take in consideration. For a brief reflection on Vienna's position on affordability, or as Kurt has mentioned, payability, I would like to welcome Martin Orner. He is an expert on affordable housing and chairman of a limited profit building association, namely EBG. Martin, do you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello.
Hello, welcome. Martin, we see time and again, especially in the dialogue with other cities, that in the creation of affordable housing, the landscape of players, of stakeholders, is crucial. This is where Vienna has a great advantage with the existence of non-profit or limited profit building associations. So against the background of your experience, can you roughly outline the very specific role of limited profit building associations in the development of affordable housing, and what is their essence?
Yeah, it's not only in Vienna, it's in Austria in general. But we have this system for more than 100 years now. We have a huge stock of apartments which we can rent out for low prices. The essence is we are not profit-oriented. We do make profits. We need profits to invest again, but we're not oriented, and we do not share our profits with our shareholders. The most of our profits stay within the companies and are used to invest again and again.
Thank you. As we have learned before, more and more residential constructions are starting. Housing is needed. And if the demand is rising, it will happen that also commercial or profit-oriented developers are playing a more important role. How can it be ensured that also privately financed housing is done in a high quality, as especially when we think of limited profit organizations, we have a lot of instrument in place on how quality management is done. How can we do that with profit-oriented developers? Do you have any ideas?
I think the most important point is to push them out of the market again, because I don't think you will achieve to reach the same quality in price and in other qualities with profit-oriented companies. It won't be possible. The market has changed enormously in Vienna. We used to have more than 2/3 of market share in housing production. Now, in 2018, we only had 30% in the subsidized sector. So we have to do something against this proportion and rise the amount of subsidized flats we build.
Okay. If we stick to the topic of the market, we see that after a certain period of time, it is possible to buy subsidized houses. This is already happening in Vienna, even more in other cities. Is there a danger of, so to say, selling out subsidized houses?
Yes. So we saw, for example, in Great Britain, that the rights to buy was a major damage for the public sector. In Vienna, at the moment, per year, around 1,500 apartments are sold to this channel. That's a third of all the apartments we built in this year. So it's already a major part, and it's possible that it will rise again. And then, of course, it's a threat to the system too.
Mm-hmm. And sticking to the topic of housing as an investment product, if real estate market shows higher expected returns than alternative investment forms, the demand for residential real estate automatically increases. How can it be prevented that housing becomes an investment product?
Yeah, it already is an investment product, especially during the last 10 years after the financial crisis. Kurt already pointed out that housing is a human right. It should be, it's a basic human need and should be a human right and not a commodity or a financial product. I think the key to stop it from being an investment product is a much more active land policy. For example, we shouldn't accept that you can make huge profits with buying and selling building land, building property. The state should confiscate these profits through taxes, and that would be a starting point for doing something against this development.
As Daniel Glaser has mentioned in the first session, there is a new zoning category, subsidized housing. So Vienna has also taken a measure at the regulatory level to promote affordable housing with this new zoning category as an instrument of land policy. Against the background, again, of your experience, is this a practical functioning instrument? And if so, how and in which ways?
We can't tell yet because as far as I know, there's no piece of land where this new zoning law is applicable up to now. We have the effect that we could already buy property with the perspective of this new zoning law, and it had a little bit positive effect on prices. But on the other hand, property which is already a building property, there the prices rose again. So there are different developments, but I think you should speed up. Let's apply this law to land, and then we can see if it works or if it doesn't work.
Thank you very much. I would like to take up the further discussion with you after our impulse lectures. And I would thank you again, Martin Ohner, for joining and giving us a brief input on how Vienna is positioning itself on the topic of affordability. I would now like to welcome our impulse lectures, again, of our partner cities, this time presented by Barcelona, Dublin, and Cologne. Again, due to our web format, we kindly ask the speakers to respect the given time frame. Each city has roughly 10 minutes to present its approach to the topic. And the audience, as you've seen before, we have the chat function, so please feel free to write us comments and questions, and we will try to add them in the discussions later on. So please welcome our first speaker, Javier Perron, housing manager in the Barcelona City Council, and he is presenting the APROP project, Temporary Social Housing in Your Neighborhood. Hello, Javier. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks for the invitation. Happy to join you. Video is a roughly 2 minutes video, so I will stick to my time if the video runs 5 times as a support to my words. As a public provider, we the Municipal Institute of Housing of Barcelona, we are engaged right now in the production of more than 6,000 new units that are mainly, all of them, intended to be for rental. And one of the problems that we are facing right now is how to go faster and try to be cheaper. In order to do this, we have established a program of, we call it Industrialized Housing. These images, they belong to the first pilot project that we have done, in which we have already living 12 families, 12 groups of users. And right now we are building another one of 42 units, and we just did the public procurement for an extra 41. So that means that we have roughly right now around 100 units in the way. We are intending to build at least 400 more, and we will use this as a way of testing the technologies and the costs and the functioning of this whole program, in order to change and redesign the program as we go along. Technically, they are not houses. They don't have a legal permit to be a house. Technically, they are a facility or an equipment of the city. We are trying to build this, and we were able to accomplish this goal in the first pilot project in less than 1 year. So from the moment we have a provider to the moment that we enter the users into the facility, it takes only 1 year. Usually, in regular constructions, we spend between 5 and 8 years. So this is an speeding up process, that's for sure. In theory, technically, these are nomad buildings. They can be assembly and disassembly and take the pieces to another location in the city, which means that we can have a mobile system within the city in order to provide these services where they are needed. In the first pilot projects that we are undertaking, there is a fixed technology. They are all using sea containers. So we are using a pre-existing material, and this should be interesting from an ecological point of view. And nowadays they are only a little bit cheaper than the normal units that we are constructing. We are spending 1,700 euros per square meter, which is very similar to the amount of money that we use in normal projects. The idea is that in the future, through industrialization and through successive orders, the prices will go down. In addition to this, in the coming projects, we are, so to say, liberating the technology. Instead of asking to the market, how can you provide us solutions only with sea containers, we are asking them, what type of solution can you provide us if the two main criteria are time and cost? So we will be open to the solutions that the market are going to provide to us. Nowadays, all these units, they are being used for social purposes. They are a collaboration between the social service department and the housing department. And even though we mix different type of social tenants, they are all social tenants. And the idea is that while we are constructing the normal units in order to enlarge the public housing stock, we need this as a tactic or an emergency tool in order to be able to cope with the needs of the social department as much as possible. Then, as you can imagine, we are not able to do it. And one final thing that I think has been extremely relevant through this process, that has nothing to do with the land, the technology, the costs, or the collaboration within different departments of the administration, I think we managed quite well in order to be able to avoid the criticisms. This was extremely open to political criticism, because the idea of sardine cans for the poor people, because the public provider is absolutely unable to be able to be faster and is not enlarging the public stock as much as the city needs. It was extremely risky. We knew that. And what we did, it was a very long process of collaboration with the civil society, with activists of the neighborhoods where these pilots were going to be implemented, and also with the different technical professions that are implied. The architects and the engineers associations, they have been extremely helpful to the project because they believe in it from the beginning. So we were able to present this with enough dignity in order to be accepted by the city in normal terms. And right now, the problem that we are facing is that every neighborhood within the city, the 92 neighborhoods within the city, they are demanding these type of facilities because they think that they are useful for the social purpose that is intended to cover. I don't know if I exceed my time or I stick to it.
Thank you very much, Javier. Perfect. On point. Thank you very much for this very interesting input, a whole new level of flexibility by managing to build something on one plot of land and then being able to move it to another. Please welcome Deity Downey. He is Head of Housing Policy, Research and Strategy in the Dublin City Council and Principal Investigator of the Dublin Housing Observatory. And today he's speaking about placemaking for new social and cost rental housing prototypes on brownfield lands in Dublin. Welcome, Deity.
Good afternoon from Dublin, and thank you all very much for the opportunity to present to you today. What I'm going to be talking about in this presentation are 2 or 3 elements of the challenges we face in Dublin in addressing our housing demand. I'll ask your colleague to move on to the second screen if that's possible.
If you click on a slide again, then you can control it yourself.
Oh, I can control it myself. Okay, even better. So, thank you very much. I'll try and keep this as short as possible. In fact, I'm going to put on a stopwatch to make sure I stay within my 10 minutes and get this going. Okay, so I'm going to try and cover 5 elements today in this presentation. I wanted to offer you a snapshot of some of the affordability issues that are facing people who are involved in trying to access our housing system in both owner occupation and in the rental market. I'm then going to offer a very quick bird's eye view of the complexity of the housing policy and strategy arena that Dublin is immersed in, and also make a few comments on how innovation is possible within this complexity. I'm going to introduce then the debate on cost rental housing in Dublin and offer some very simplified and stylized characteristics of what a cost rental housing system has to do, and I'll mention our colleagues in Vienna on that too. Then we'll look particularly at the Emmett Road development, which is the prototype that the city is developing, which will mix the residential rental forms of cost rental and more traditional or more established social rental, looking a little bit about the background to that scheme, giving you a very quick look at the design approach to the placemaking in that area, and then signing off with some of the challenges that we're at the minute that we're facing at the present in terms of stakeholder consultation and as we proceed through our planning and development system. Okay, so all being well, this should change. No, it's not changing.
Is it changing?
That hasn't changed. Oh, here we go. Right, that's the second one. So you're looking at a map here of the island of Ireland, and oops, sorry, need to go back. Okay, I'll see if I can get that to happen. There are now two maps. No, we're going forward. We need to go back. It may be the... yes, hang on. It may be coming back now. Please.
It always takes a little bit, sorry. There's always a bit of a time delay.
Right, one more time. Let's see if it comes up. What you're going to see is a map of the country of Ireland, and I want to draw your attention to the shaded areas on the east coast of the island. There we are. That's a distribution map showing you the concentration of households in owner occupation who are paying above 1/3, actually in some cases 35% and more, of their net household income for their mortgage cost. Now, it's a measure, ratio measure that we call the mortgage rate to income, and it measures the amount of income consumed by housing costs for new entrants, first-time buyers, who are borrowing at 90% of the market price for a 30-year period. And these are households, mostly two-person income households, who are on the average incomes. And the reason I'm putting that up is to demonstrate that there is a very substantial housing burden cost for a number of the new entrants to owner occupation. And one of the challenges, of course, we are facing is that this is pushing people towards a longer term residence in the private rented sector. And in there are other challenges too. But primarily, it has been mentioned earlier by other colleagues about the role of the profit-seeking or the speculative or forms of development. And we do have a very robust and very, very dynamic development sector in Ireland in the private housing market. And there has been a considerable recovery in the Irish housing market over the past 4 or 5 years. Notwithstanding that, there are very substantial challenges in terms of the supply of housing that is affordable to the majority who seek to enter this tenure. And it is leading to a substantial squeeze on the opportunity for households to enter. So this is transferring demand into the private rented sector. And the private rented sector has its own affordability challenges. And hopefully this will come up now in a second. And what you should see now is two maps, this time focusing in on the region of Dublin. We have an increased supply in the rental sector in terms of new build as well, but the supply is at a very high level of rent and cost to households. The supply is primarily being driven by a new build-to-rent sector, which is emerging, particularly in Dublin, but also nationwide. And that has been facilitated by some aspects of our planning code that has changed the nature of residential development in its density and its height. It has also reduced some space standards as well. But we have seen a growth, and it's been mentioned earlier, in the institutional and private equity investment in our housing stock in the private rented sector. A lot of the supply that we've seen in Dublin over the past 2 to 3 years has been targeted at a very segmented element of the market, particularly what we're calling the short-term rental occupancy, where there isn't a permanency or a longer-term occupancy over 2 or 3 year periods. That's characterized by corporate rentals, student accommodation, actually, apart hotels, and other forms of short-term occupancy. And I should mention the platform-based impacts of Airbnb and others in changing the nature of the rental market, although COVID has put a halt to Airbnb in Dublin for the moment, anyhow. There are also some very major security of tenure issues that persist in the rental market in Dublin and in Ireland generally. But what I want you to note in the map is the change in the nature of the ownership pattern in the private rented sector. So the map on the left shows you the distribution of individual landlords who own one or more property. And that actually has declined as an overall proportion in Dublin over the period 2018 to 2020. Although the number of tenancies has increased, the proportion of them in individual ownership has declined. And what has grown in its stead has been a very substantial expansion in the number of company-owned tenancies, landlords that are operating as institutional companies or private equity investors. And that has increased, for example, in the total Dublin region by nearly 45% over a 2-year period, jumping from just over 16,700 units in 2018 to 24,692 in 2020. And if we look singularly at the city of Dublin, which I'm not sure if that cursor is working, but is right there in the centre space of the map, that increase in Dublin is approximately 4,000 additional company-owned spaces. That's driving some very localized impacts on house prices as well as rents, because rents are linked to asset price inflation. And the overall net effect is to put a very major squeeze on both households who are living in the rented sector, attempting to save money to enter the owner-occupied sector. And so there are affordability stresses in both tenures. So I'm going to move on now. So these stresses have been established and are not unknown to housing practitioners or planners or indeed economists. But in the case of Dublin, we're looking at, in the past 3 or 4 years, a very particular experience as we have become a very internationalized real estate market. And I'm hoping the map will change now. There we go. So we have, as a city, attempted to mine our way through a whole plethora of different strategies and actions from the international EU level, the regional and national level, right down to the local level. And we find ourselves in a complexity of debate around what form of housing and what forms of tenure will be most appropriate to meet the challenges of affordability, inclusion, and sustainability. Now, there have been and there continue to be substantial debates in Dublin and elsewhere on this. But one of the things the city has been very good at is trying to identify a strategy unifier, the thing that pulls these various frameworks together. And there's some very obvious matters that have already been named. But one thing that we're beginning to form a more assertive opinion on is the issue of placemaking and how that begins to unify a whole series of different challenges around the development and provision of new forms of housing. Within that context, then, we think it's probably much more likely to be able to introduce cost rental as a housing tenure option. It's more understandable for a start, and it relates to the idea of a place of residence where people will succeed. It'll be inclusive, and then it'll be a place where we'll emphasize sustainability in social, economic, and environmental forms. The cost rental is a technical description, you might argue, of the form of finance behind the production of this housing. And while some policy wonks like ourselves and others might understand it reasonably well, many people out there find it hard to understand. So as a municipality trying to convince our citizenry and others that it is an attractive and new form of tenancy, we're going to have to work on our language. So we're beginning to talk about placemaking, and that's very much evident in the discussions we're having about our new forms of housing. So the next slide talks a little bit about what cost rental is beginning to mean. Now, I don't want to dwell on this. You might read it in due course. But we have two different types of rent that people are familiar with. If you rent from the social landlord, you're usually a lower income household. You're paying a differential rent, which is adjusted to your income and never more than 15% of your net income. So it's quite affordable at that point, but then you have to recall that the incomes of households here are very, very low, quite substantial, and many of these households are in income poverty. If you're renting from a private landlord, you're paying a market rent, basically covering the cost of the accommodation provided plus the landlord's profit net of whatever costs they incur. Neither of these is a cost rent, and we've managed to get people to understand that. What we're now beginning to get people to understand more is that a cost rent is an approach that allows us to describe a rent to cover the actual costs of providing the accommodation without profit, but capable of determining a cost to provide good quality management and maintenance, and some additionality that may yet allow housing services in care or support or employment or training or education to also be provided. Although that last part is still very much out there as a policy debate. It hasn't really been attached. So if we were being asked how to describe our objectives at city level, we would be able to say that we're beginning to get an understanding that cost rental is about producing new quality, mid-market public rental housing options that are all about delivering a mixed income community, not just mixed tenure. There's a very important difference between the two. A mixed income neighbourhood which improves the integration of households across different cohorts and backgrounds and focuses on inclusion and delivering sustainability. So it sounds very easy in one sentence, but there's an awful lot in there to unpack. We've begun to really understand the challenges of making this debate significant by the learning and the knowledge exchange we've been able to benefit from our good friends in Vail-Vohin, and particularly the work that we have done last year in cooperating in the production of the Vienna Model Housing Exhibition. I won't say too much about that, but if you'd like to see more about that particular set of exchanges and events, including podcasts, including all of the presentations and lectures that were made, please visit that website, housingmodeldublin.ie, and you can pick up a little bit more on that. It's quite a substantive amount of resource there. So moving on. Let me introduce now the actual prototype location and the development that we're focused on here. It's a site in the west inner city, west part of the city, a historic area of the city, actually, bounded at one end by a graveyard which was established just after Catholic emancipation and was the first Catholic graveyard post-penal laws. It's also a site where a was raised to fight polio. It's also a site that has hosted various different forms of public housing over the years. So it has, as Angela was saying earlier, an enormous memory locally to a whole host of different generations who have lived in this area. But at present, it is an empty brownfield site where there was a former public housing estate. And the city is in the process of constructing a planning and development strategy to deliver 472 new dwellings, 70% of which will be a cost rental provision, and the other 140 units, or 30% of the site, will be for social rental. There will be a considerable variety in the dwelling types and the design on this site in order to ensure we have an appropriate, age-appropriate form of housing provision and dwelling types. And again, the issues of flexibility and temporality have been mentioned, and they're very significant in how we may yet be able to adapt parts of the site and use it. We're intending to introduce mixed use around commercial, community, recreational, leisure and sports facilities, and the commitments are a new public library, a supermarket with retail units, a high-quality civic building that the city will deliver, a local neighbourhood park with play facilities and a public plaza. So there is an ambition to this site which is very high. It's about improved mobility, permeability and connectedness in the local area. It's about a high-quality, vibrant, mixed-use urban quarter, to use that language. Thus far, we have engaged very successfully in the production of a development framework. That gives you that little schematic there at the bottom in terms of how the mixed use of the site was envisaged. We are now much more formally engaged with a design team who have been appointed since May of this year. They're called Bulchois McAvoy Architects, a very distinguished firm of architects. And they are engaged with us in the city in the process of drawing forward a whole series of consultations. And what we're trying to do with that is engage at a whole series of levels about how the design approach to the creation of this new place integrates a whole series of issues for people locally. And that should come up next in the next slide, I hope. They are focused on matters of climate and resilience, affordability over time, and not just at the point of entry to the housing, in terms of the health impacts and well-being impacts of the housing, in terms of its connectivity, in terms of its community and the living opportunities it presents through shared facilities and other forms of dwelling typologies, which will be hopefully innovative and original, and about bringing back that sense of place into the neighbourhood that's vibrant, that's got a reputation and is attractive and is bringing together different facets of a host community, which is well established, and new households will come to live there. So at present, the city has established an Inchicore Regeneration Consultative Forum. Inchicore is the name of the part of the city where this site sits. And we are in the process of setting out a series of questions, you can see them in the blue box there, about how we're trying to get formal engagement with a whole range of different stakeholders and citizens in the area to produce an understanding and refine our understanding of what we will propose. So right now, we're in a time-bound process working towards spring of next year, when we hope to make a full application to our National Planning Board directly as a local authority. And that's the stage we're at here in this last timeline. We're engaged in a survey and various forms of engagement with community actors and stakeholders. We hope to be able to produce a community exhibition of design typologies and various ideas around placemaking. That will result, all being well, in a design team report for the end of the 8th of October or so, which will allow us then to trigger the next stage in our design and development process, and a series of formal consultations then with a whole range of very important stakeholders, such that we can refine and get the type of political support required locally to support this planning application, which we hope to make in April 2021. And that's when it gets really quite interesting from a number of different levels, both planning and development, because by then we will have had to have realised some very firm details on what a cost rental scheme actually means, which brings us back to that very interesting slide that Kurt set up at the beginning about what are the income limits for various household types as they come into this housing option. And we have yet to get to that point. So I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daiti, for starting the cost rental policy debate and elaborating on its effects on placemaking. While we are at the moment trying to start the video for Javier Perron, I will make an exception and start with one question that we got from the audience directly to you, Daiti. And this is, are land costs included in the rent costs? And second question, on which payback period are rent costs calculated?
Okay, very good questions, actually. The first is that the land is owned by the municipality and it has no historic cost attached to it. And we do need to agree this formally as part of our planning application proposal. So that's part of the funding matters that we will have to agree with national government, because this is a pilot prototypical approach. In terms of the duration, we would expect a 25 to 30 year borrowing window. We would hope in particular to be able to demonstrate how the maturation factors that emerge as the debt is paid down on the cost of development to affect an improvement in the range of services that can be provided as a public landlord.
Thank you very much, Daiti, for the answer. The rest we will discuss during the discussions.
Can I ask Daiti, meanwhile? It's good to see you again.
Yes.
And I was really interested in the cost rental system. Does it mean you're covering the costs, but the social rental would be cheaper and subsidized so that you can still cover the cost? Is that right?
Yes, that is, you've picked up on a very substantial matter of decision making that we're engaging in trying to resolve. Our social rental charge will be lower than the economic cost of producing the housing.
Yeah.
And so we need to improve the integration of our housing subsidies. And we're very careful to understand how the subject subsidies, as you've described them, can melt away from the housing economy or the housing finance involved in this. But where our tenants, our social housing tenants, are unable to afford the economic rent, we will need to agree an income subsidy. Now, there is a system that allows for a household to occupy private rented housing, privately owned housing in the rental market, and an income subsidy from the state. So we would be of a view that it would be important to equalise the access to that subsidy between a social housing tenant and a private rented tenant. And there is a very substantial series of challenges in making that happen. But it's being recognised that there is a cost efficiency to allowing the state to build on its public land and integrate its housing subsidies than having to rely on subject subsidies for tenants in the rental market, which is open market values in the private market.
It's a major step into a new system. Quite a lot of questions to answer, right?
In fact, and as I said, the debate has been formed at a number of levels of advice to government over the years. And what we haven't seen really is the range of that are needed to support on a bipartisan, a comprehensive basis, plus community, business, trade unions, a whole range of interests really, who understand how the economics of this housing model continues to allow for good quality, sustainable construction and development and investment. And it actually is a much more viable and stable form of housing economy than the boom-bust cycles that we've been experiencing in Ireland over the past number of years.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Interested to speak on.
After our last impulse lecture, that will be now held by Jochen Maul, head of GAG Estate, which is the largest housing company in the Cologne area, with the city of Cologne as the main shareholder of the company. Jochen Maul is giving an impulse lecture on the developments in Waldbadviertel in Cologne. Welcome, Jochen Maul. Do you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. I hope you hear me too.
Yes, very well. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I heard before new ways of living and affordable rent and prices come along with developing neighborhoods. And I want to show you a development of our company where we try to combine all three aspects. It's a typical development for us because we develop neighborhoods for now over 100 years and did this in lots of places of Cologne. And the one development I want to tell you about, it's located on the outskirts of Cologne. And we started with it in 2009. And it's like, as you can see, just a green lawn. And it's been a green space that was used for dog walkers, joggers, dirt bikers, and all this stuff. And it's like heaven for architects to do something, to plan something on a drawing board. This is like it's looking now, and now we've embedded in this front garden of the surrounding houses a completely new neighborhood, offering a quality for existing neighbors as well as the newcomers. And we call it today the Waldbadviertel. But it actually located it at the outskirts of the city. As far as Cologne's inhabitants are concerned, everything more than 500 meters away from the cathedral is classed as outskirts. And if it's on the right side of the River Rhine, it's even worse in people's minds. But if we think in terms of urban distances, though, and consider the growing city, we are really in the right heart of Cologne. As you can see, we are just 5 kilometers from the Cologne Cathedral. But probably you will ask why we are building on a green space like this and spend even more money to some owners who own this ground. First, it's because we do this for over 100 years, as I mentioned, and Second, grounds like this for building a large amount of affordable flats are very spare in Cologne these times. So next. Doesn't work like I want to do. Despite its green location, Despite its green location, it was difficult to develop these surroundings because it was highly frequent traffic routes and businesses. There was a clay pigeon shooting area with highly lead contamination, a huge gas pipeline under the ground, and nonetheless a very strong resistance of the local inhabitants around the area. And the politicians in the borough was also against building some houses on the ground. The challenge was therefore to achieve the connection to the existing settlement, even in such inner city development, while at the same time preserving the amenities. After all, we are proposing to build on the neighborhood's front garden and rub the dog walk. That is why it is particularly important that we always try to design a high quality inner city architectural structure. And this is why we always specify in an urban design competition that is all about creating a neighborhood that is attractive to live in. In addition, we try to involve politics, boroughs, administration, neighborhoods, and social partners, as you have seen it before in the presentations, in the development process and the discussions with the participating architects. We did a competition with 9 contestants, and as a result of the discussions, the area to be developed had on the one side to allow connection to the existing area, and on the other side keep the distance to it, such as a noise emission or underground development, as well as economic efficiency also had to be borne in mind. In this respect, nothing about the specifications such as nature, air, distances, and quality of life has actually changed since the 1920s when we first built our first estates. Design that impressed the jury the most considered all these points, and this was Lawrence and Meyer architect, who was the winner of the competition. Locating the single terraced houses in the outer fringes and increasing the number of stories from the outside to the inside of the development means new separate neighborhoods we could create inside the development. We have a percentage of 35 subsidized housing, and usually, to answer the question that was mentioned before, we think that anything above 50% of social housing in a neighborhood is out of view and will lead to future problems. Next. So it is at least as important to integrate different population structures here as it is in the inner city. That's why we offer a mix of different apartment sizes, structures, types of financing and development. This is how we create what city is all about. It means for us urban life. For social housing, it is possible to use the state-sponsored loan with reduced interest and amortization rates and get an additional subsidy of 25% of the loan rate. In addition, renting the ground with low ground rent interest instead of buying the ground is another method to keep the rents and the prices affordable for long term. Combined all this, it is possible to get various rents from 6.80 euros per square meter for subsidized flats up to 11 euros per square meter for the privately financed flat. The prices of the owner-occupied houses and flats started from 2,500 per square meter. For the office building, we started the rent of 8 euros per square meter. Additional heating and ancillary costs from 2 euros per square meter. And the social housing rents is fixed with a 1.5% yearly rent increase for 15 to 20 years. So we got very affordable rents for long term. But lifelong living in a neighborhood should mean that I do not have to leave my familiar surroundings as life circumstances change. Whether I'm a child and want to play and have my grandmother nearby, whether I'm moving into my first apartment, or as an older person living alongside the younger generation in alternative forms of housing, for example, a multi-generation house that we have here. Too much. Urban life today, more than ever, is for us about living side by side with nature, creating quality of life outside the home, both for ecological and social reasons. Here, too, it is important for us to consider all generations at an early stage. It is precisely maintaining this balance that calls for great sensitivity in this situation. After all, we are creating new homes for many thousands of people in such large areas. Sometimes it is only later that we discover that it should have been done better. For example, we built in this area a daycare center, which was woefully inadequate for the long term because generational change in the surrounding neighborhood was not enough taken into account in the planning process. So when the first tenants and owners moved in, there was not enough places in the kindergarten. And next, I will try, the next one is, as you can see, the quality of architecture is very, very important for us. And as you can see, you can't see any difference between the private owned or financed houses and the social housing. And this is because we don't want to give a stigmatization at a look from outside. So we just got the differences between social housing and private financed housing just in the inside. For example, you got the floor in the house. It's a little bit cheaper than in the private houses. But just from the outside, you can't see it mixing types of finance and structure, and population isn't all you have to do to create a modern social life and on the drawing boards. You have to create city life, and city means movement and bringing people together. This is why we cooperated with the German Sports University here in Cologne and developed a plan for triggering the new inhabitants to join, use bikes, walk, and, for example, be aware of using stairs inside instead of the elevators. And we also cooperated with the German Sport University to designing the outer landscapes and have the so-called Waldbadviertel on the move project, and especially in these times where we're all working from home, do internet gaming, and use delivery services for pizza and all this stuff. It's all more important for us to provide quality exercise and leisure facilities in a neighborhood. This too must be taken into account in a modern neighborhood design, both inside and outside the buildings. It is also important to communicate and make the new residents aware of all the leisure time mobility opportunities. Leisure time mobility is arguably even more important than traffic mobility when people make their residential area choices. In recent years, we have seen a major shift towards low car use, especially in the city. And we have tried to build in these aspects here from an early stage in the Waldbad neighborhood with the in and for the residents and for the neighborhood. But this is all the more important as we preserve the richness of the landscape of the city. All strata of the population need to be able to participate in city life. and even with steeply rising rents, including in what we have traditionally been lower cost areas of the city. This is easy to see when you look at the rents for existing apartments. On the right side of the chart, you can see the rent level in 2017, and on the left side in 2019 for Cologne. And as you can see, the gray marked low rent districts in Cologne on the right bank of the Rhine are also diminishing. And if you do not want gated communities and considering the rising prices for ground and building costs, it's still important for the authorities to provide attractive financial conditions for social housing for developers like us. In addition to that, cities should have clear stipulations to developers to consider a number of social housings in their planning. And in Cologne we do, we have a minimum percentage of now 30%. But urban life means diversity, and because we've already emphasized urban life, means a healthy mix too. Mixing does not only mean social mixing by affordable rents and purchase prices, but also mixing in age groups, household configurations, and nationalities. And people in every major European city, as you know, have now different biographies and origins. And we therefore face the challenge of creating socially stable neighborhoods without major conflict and escalating segregation. This can only be achieved by consciously building in a diverse range of offers and expanding the resident population. And this will also only come about if we work with and for people on long-term basis and bring them together. And if you test yourself, it's rarely your neighbor who doesn't fit in. It's always the stranger you see on the news who's curious and should better stay outside. That is why neighborhood development today also includes securing commitment from and for the neighborhood by identifying with them. Next. So more age-sensitive forms of housing must adapt it to people's needs, and it is therefore important for us to develop and build, integrate, and support age-sensitive forms of living in each new neighborhood, even though these are arduous or to develop and build. And even though it's not always a very attractive economic proposition for us to build it, but it's very needful. And we did this in the Waldbadviertel by using modern and alternative forms of living like multi-generation housing. We built flat sharing communities for people with dementia, with physical impairments, and for students who care for the elder people. But engagement within the quarter resides and means living together. It's not just enough to build the neighborhoods, especially when the surrounding areas are among the poorest parts of the city. For us, it's important to breathe life into the neighborhoods, and this can only be achieved by ensuring sustainable management and commitment over decades, not just years. And this is usual in the subsidies of the authorities, that they only afford for 2 years all the partners. And for us, the neighborhood must be supported and people must be encouraged to get involved in the neighborhood. And this can be achieved if partners who can bring residents and neighbors together in the most varied places can be found. A project developer can indeed make the first move like us, but however, as much as possible of this needs to be taken on board by the residents and the owners of the buildings. And to keep it in the long term, it needs encouraged landlords which do not have a fixed selling point, but to keep their houses also for decades, like we do, or if you need a picture of it, like an anchor of interest. Try to get the next one. No, this was too much. We do have lots of partners here, and all the people in the neighborhood, and for the people in the neighborhood. We've created a special project like a social diversity project, In the Waldbad neighborhood, it's a base for partners working in the neighborhood and the district, and as well as the residential groups. People can also meet here, and these partners' commitment can radiate out into the neighborhood. This is the only way to reach as many people as possible in a rich population structure. However, neighborhood management can only work effectively if the partners are steady and the facilities are financed on a long-term basis again and again. In our opinion, to achieve this, housing owners, social partners, and the municipality must work together on a long-term basis.
Dear Jochen Maul, I'm sorry to interrupt, but taking the time in consideration, we must get to an end so that we still have enough time for the discussion.
Doesn't matter to me.
Thank you very much.
As you can see, you can plan a lot, but it's much more important for sustained content living to manage the neighborhood over its lifetime. After all, this phase takes much longer than just looking at the first few years of commitment. The key here is to care. Only those who care about, like we said before, the Kümmerer, the theme in the long term, have the chance to help and shape developments in the city and the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers of the partner cities. There is a lot we have to discuss about, and I will hand over to my colleague Johannes, who will lead the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This was a very inspiring mixture of through presentation showing dealing on different levels. Dublin showing a complete new housing scheme on a cost rental basis. Barcelona with this innovative model of temporary social housing, and now we have this district in Cologne with different forms of housing for different target groups, combining also different forms of financing. Before we enter into the debate, I would again like to introduce guests from Vienna. Gabo Heindl is an architect and urban planner with a broad experience in designing public buildings, but also urban design studies and master plans for urban space. She's also known for her theoretical contributions to the whole social housing debate, policy debate. Her latest book is titled Stadtkonflikte and deals, as she says, with radical democracy in architecture and urban planning. Hello, Gabo. We have...
I'm just trying to say hello. Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Thank you. Good to have you here. Sina Lipp is a sociologist and not only an expert in housing policy, but also in all issues of social justice and inequality, diversity and integration. She's working at Neuner Haus, which is a place to go for homeless people, which is providing not only shelter, but also medical treatment and above all advice. And like Gabo, she's engaging in public discourse on inequality and those framework conditions that you need for inclusive societies. Hello, Sina Lipp. Okay, we hope to hear you in a minute.
Hello. Now it's working.
Okay.
Hello.
Good to have you here. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
And finally, we have Raimund Gutmann, who is a political scientist and urban sociologist. He is scientific director of Wohnbund Consult, which is an offer providing analysis and process management for housing initiatives, innovative housing projects, and urban development processes. And he's an expert in social neighborhood development and community design. Hello, Raimund.
Hello, everybody.
Okay, good to have you here. My first questions perhaps go to Gabo and Sina. We have seen that there is all the cities that we have on coordinated and communicated with are facing rising housing costs throughout Europe and increasing, of course, demand of affordable housing. Now, my first question is a very general one. Do we just need more social housing within the schemes that we have, or rather have to invest in new specialized housing models for addressing very specific target groups? Who wants to start? Perhaps Gabu, if you like.
Okay, I can do that. Well, thanks also for having me join this very interesting discussion. And it's been very nice to see the presentations from the projects in the different cities, and to see actually that it's basically the same topic, not the same, it's not completely comparable, but it's an analog issue. See, the housing problem is back in nearly every place, and the issues are, of course, how do we relate to that? And what is also interesting to see is that the techniques and methods are kind of similar as much as the cities allow that. And even I would say the housing looks similar. And maybe that is where I would even like to start in the first place. To some extent, we need more affordable housing, but we also need more city or more kind of urban structure, or maybe more identifiable places. And the question is, we do have existing identifiable places, and I think that there we really have to look into how we can actually use existing place. And I know that in this conference, beton gold or speculative housing has been mentioned quite a bit, and with that comes also empty houses. And to actually see that we distribute or redistribute the existing space, because at the end of the day, we will face the ecological issue of like to build ever more and to seal ever more space also will get us into troubles. So we will have to actually in the future rethink that. And with that, we may also have the chance to actually say, if we continue to build the parts of the existing city and repair that, and to actually also give them better shapes, very simply put, give them more identifiably place-making conditions. And this is very tricky when it comes to like providing a lot of affordable housing and to overcome basically the stacking of affordable housing when it comes to like also the architecture and the quality. And it's nice to see that the social housing also in other places is in quality not different from the private housing. But we also know that the top private housing at the moment is quite possible, because private housing, if it comes to like a speculative housing, is also difficult for cities to actually maintain a certain level. So that would be kind of my also feedback to what I saw so far. And when it comes to what we need to build, is we are facing it ourselves. The question really is, what city do we expect, or what city can we imagine? And of course, the society is extremely broad and diverse. So it's also not one city that we expect. So we'll have to use many people's, many actors' imaginations. I do think that to include people in building these cities and in building these houses, that will actually be key to have the diversity of housing. And this is one thing I'm sure that everybody is kind of asking him herself, how can we actually allow and open up participation, let's call it differently, or actually self-initiative by people moving into these places and making the place their place. That's a key challenge also.
Thank you. I will come back to the question of participation and including people in a second. First, I would like to hand on the question to Sina Lipp, the question of specific housing for specific target groups. Do we run the danger that other groups where you have the feeling that although we plan housing for everybody and a broad range of the population in Vienna is allowed for social housing, are there still groups that are in danger of being left behind? And is there a specific type of housing that we need for them?
Yes, definitely. From my professional perspective, the question of affordable housing is very much linked to the question, how can we end homelessness, of course. because although Vienna has a huge social housing sector, there are increasing lacks in the supply of housing. So when we have a closer look at the housing market of Vienna, we have a very small segment of owned flats and about 33% of private rental flats and 43% of social housing, which is quite a lot. And compared to other European cities, that's really a very solid basis for a good and stable housing provision. But we still have more than 12,000 service users of homeless assistance services in Vienna. So the question is, what are the reasons for homelessness in the city that is actually one of the largest property managers in Europe? And yes, in our daily work with our service users, we identify several conflicts. For example, as everybody knows, people in Vienna also face increasing housing costs, stagnant wages, and increasing social inequality. And what I can see is that we have too much housing supply for upper and middle class households, and too little affordable housing for marginalized groups beyond normal income and alternative forms of cohabitation in terms of the entrance conditions to the social housing market. So in practice, that means we have social closure towards the lowest parts of society, and this causes a transferred demand of an affordable housing segment for the poor to a newly created segment within homeless assistance services. And I think that's a very important point we have to deal with immediately, because also when we look at the consequences of the corona crisis, we know that unemployment rates are going to rise. People who were put on reduced hours can maybe manage to compensate the lower incomes for a few months, but not permanently. And at some point, at our work at Neunerhaus, we fear a spillover of people who have been at risk of poverty before the COVID crisis and now find themselves in a severe crisis, because that's what Corona has shown us already so far. It definitely set up a magnifier on social problems, which means those most severely affected are the ones that have been in trouble before Corona already. So, yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I think we really we need to make a shift when it comes to the housing solutions.
Yeah, thank you. The entrance conditions is of course a political question that will be core of all, yes, also political debate. I would like to bring also Raimund into the debate. Vienna is, of course, famous for providing housing for the people. The question is, are we also already successful in bringing the people into the debate, including them in terms of hearing their voices, hearing what their specific needs are when designing housing for them? What is your experience, Raimund?
Yeah, there are already some important aspects mentioned by Gabo and Sina. I would say to emphasize that affordable housing is, of course, a matter of numbers. The quantity of subsidized houses, subsidized flats, but it's not simply the yearly number of flats or homes, respectively. So affordable housing is, on the longer run, the quality of the housing production as well. It's the quality aspects, the soft factors, and so on. And of course, more than ever, the matter of meeting the social targets, because our society changes a lot. The socio-demographic aspects we know, or age, there are different reduction of households, etc. The challenge to manage is social sustainability, which has a lot of aspects we perhaps come to later on. Also, the affordable housing must not ignore the imperative of mixed urbanity. City life is not only having a small flat and floating water and electricity. So it's instead of merely residential buildings, we have to look after mixed urbanity. Therefore, for me, the goal concerning affordability must be a balancing of architectural, urban design, ecological, and social sustainability with costs. Of course, costs is an important matter, but without looking to the specific qualities, offering housing to different target groups, we will not succeed solving the problems. And for me, the very important aspect is to give room to the different, because this is an answer of all the questions of socio-demographic change we have to look for. It is, for instance, the creation, planning, and building new housing typologies of flats and apartments regarding the diversity of our society, planning more flexibility of the basic structure, also adaptability, introducing the topic of shared rooms is a very important aspect, complementary to small apartments, and offering flexi rooms or so-called plus rooms, complementary to small units. Increasing also the share of co-housing and other types of bottom initiatives is very important in my mind. Then very important also is to support city life is shaping resilient neighborhoods. The instrument to achieve this is a professional neighborhood management with its activities in community building. We have several institutions in Vienna, starting with the Gebietsbetreuung or the Wohnpartner, or also some small institutes who do community building in new, also in regenerating areas. And last not least, to finish my input is we need permanent evaluation and housing research to cope with the change of society and living.
Thank you for this quite comprehensive answer. So that's not one thing to do. Still, I'd like to stick to one question. I think in each presentation today, we heard that yes, we want to avoid stigmatization. Of course, we want to have identifiable places in a good shape with high quality for everybody. But there is always this trade-off between quality and costs. and this is a question that goes now also to our partner cities. A few strategies have already been mentioned. Flexibility, the apartment size is the main factor. But isn't there? Do we have to lose certain quality standards in order to provide really cheap housing? Is there certain? Have we reached certain standards in the development over the last years that are contradicting our wish to provide that kind of cheap housing that is necessary for the really vulnerable groups? I don't know where to start. I would perhaps start with our partner cities, if you don't mind. I would like to ask Jochen first, and I have seen that Gabo is raising her hands. Jochen, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm there. Thank you. Yeah. I think we should not change the qualities, because we will pay for it later on. We can see all the buildings from the 70s or the 60s, when we started first with social housing, and all these buildings, these neighborhoods are now very, very very, very problematic neighborhoods, and we're doing a lot of repair there, social repairing, and so it's very, very important to keep the quality standards now, and better pay for it now, and pay for it by social housing doesn't work without subsidies.
Thank you, Gabo.
Yeah, I think I really want to actually challenge the ever smaller tendency. I think it's a real issue of basically we are producing useless space, really inhuman space with even subsidies, to be honest. I think we have to be very clear about there is a right to housing, yes, but also right to decent housing. Decent housing literally means that if we ever increase I'm not saying decreasing apartments, and we are already a very small sector. I'm not talking about 150 square meter apartments or larger, which we also kind of see on other markets. But when it comes to social housing, we should not come back to an efficiency and most austerity discussion in housing when it comes to, at the end, what we saw, for instance, in a research project that we did for the city of Vienna. We realized that in all the small places that it's then actually women not having their own room anymore, having to actually sleep in the living room. I think there's also a right for every person to actually, every woman to have her own room, and this room to be bigger than 8 square meters. And it's if we continue this tendency, which also is the same, I would be happy to discuss that, we should actually build in this minimum segment, and then talking about social housing, we should try to build bigger apartments, higher ceilings. This is resilience in housing. These are actually spaces that have a quality for a long time and then it's as we know, it's not so much the money that is given into higher rooms or a bit more square meters, as long as we have a bathroom and a kitchen in an apartment, which costs more. So to change this tendency would actually say, okay, if we already, and this is so important, if we use public money for housing, we use it properly, and we really build good housing. And this, I'm totally with Jochen, that it's basic. This is the only way where we say housing is infrastructure. Public housing is infrastructure for the public rights, for the public issue of housing as a human right, and it should be as good as possible and not as minimum as possible. And when it comes to cost reality, and their discussion to me resembles the discussion about Wärmedämmung, or where we basically take the cheapest material and wonder how we will do with it in the future. And it is the same with the size and the quality of our social housing that we build. Again, I think we need to be really, really demanding in these discussions. And I've seen many housing projects where you enter and you ask yourself, like you ask yourself, couldn't public money be spent better, and still be spent in with like for social housing?
Thank you. Perhaps the question to Martin Ornak. You're building the houses. And you know that the standards are high, and also your wishes to build high quality housing. Where can you actually save money? Because construction costs, as we know, are at the top. Land costs are at the top. Where is the potential for saving money?
First of all, we are very proud that we build higher qualities for lower prices than the private sector. I think that's an important point in at least the Austrian system of social housing. I think there's not too much potential for cost saving in building houses. Where I can see a potential is in the production method. We build houses like we did in 500 years ago, in principle, and I think we could change this. We are actually having a research project on changing this process, on using other building methods, but I don't think it will become much cheaper. So I think we have to discuss where does the money come from, who pays for the qualities, and who pays for the human right of housing.
Thank you. Do our other partner cities wish to join in for that? Javier and Tahiti?
Well,
yes.
I don't know if I am going to be a little bit against the current, but nowadays in Barcelona, I think that we don't have a major problem with quality. We have a problem with quantity. The amount of supply that public and limited profit providers we are able to put into the market is extremely narrow in comparison with the needs. And in a way, one of the criticisms that public housing is attracting right now in the city is that we build houses of too much quality. Standard is too good. So in a way, this type of projects of industrialization, they try to speed up the production, but as well to create a medium standard, a lower standard in comparison with regular houses. So, of course, there is always room for improvement, ways to save money. I also believe, as my previous colleague, that industrialization and standardization is a key, which means that size matters. If you are engaged in a production process of 2,000 units, you won't be able as effective as if you are producing 3, 4, 5 times more. So size is important, industrialization, standardization. But again, maybe this is not a very German or Austrian trend, but in Spain, and I believe in other places in the southern part of the European Union, the problem with public and limited profit housing is that we have too little in terms of quantity, and the examples are more than decent in terms of quality. And this doesn't go in favor of the public image of those housing. In a way, it triggers a lot of criticism because they are too nice, but they are extremely too little.
Thank you. Tahiti, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. That's a very interesting insight from Javier as well, because we know as public housing providers that the trade-off between quality and costs is a false economy. And we know that because we've been, as cities, providing public housing in some form for generations. But the context in which we're trying to maintain the capital investment for the scale of housing provision needed is a challenging one when the modularized production systems that were referred to earlier are being deployed in private speculative housing and building very quickly and in a very integrated manner, but at a much smaller size. And it comes back to one of the challenges Dublin has in beginning a broader debate on who should aspire and be happy to live as a tenant in the city rather than as an owner, and only the conflict of interest that may arise between tenants and owners. Personally speaking, our standards in public housing are higher overall in terms of energy efficiency and space standards than in the private market. And the influence that has on the private market is substantial. And historically, it has improved standards in the private market. But we do know that the trade-off is a false economy. In the meantime, convincing public support to expand public housing provision while it is seen as of higher value and higher cost is a very challenging one, and my sympathies are with Javier in that sense.
Can I just join in here, jump in here? Because I think like the numbers, I think that we should never question the numbers in terms of what we need. But just to respond to Javier, it seems like it's not that limited or public social housing is too nice or too little. We have to change the rhetorics here and say that speculative housing should be nicer. And basically, and argue not for like reducing the quality where it comes from the public, but actually saying, okay, this must be the push or the standard, and this is where the public politics, administration, and so on has to come in and make sure that it's not super low quality when it's even within speculative housing, which can only be because there is a lack, because actually there's such a need in housing.
Thank you, Gabo. I've just seen that we're a bit over time. We wanted to stop before 6. Now it's almost 6. I thank you all for this very interesting debate. I also believe what Daiti said is right, that through the high standards in funded housing, this has had an enormous effect also on the private market, and the public financed housing has pushed the standards up all over the segment, and has at the same time also had a limiting effect on the cost level. So the higher the amount of publicly funded housing, the more this is also helping to reduce the costs on the private market. The final word for today goes to Kurt for his closing remarks. I know that we have a bit outrun our time, so I will not ask you to sum everything up, but are there one or two takeaways that you want to mention finally?
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot of takeaways, and I took a lot of notes, and I will have to work on them. I'm very happy that all of the partner cities have been contributing so intensely, and except for Tahiti, all of them have done it not in the mother language. So it's also, I really appreciate that, and thank you very much for that. I also want to thank Lena Lauren. We did see her result in the pause, and she's still working on it. So maybe we can have the result from the second session tomorrow in the beginning. Thank you very much. I don't want to make it longer now, as we have another session tomorrow, and I'm really looking forward to that, and especially also I'm looking forward to then talk to the cities after that and find out what there's such a big amount of topics we can work on, and we really should. I'm happy to do that. And I again want to thank also the Viennese partners who came in for this discussion to enrich it and to really bring in their perspectives, because that helps a lot for the further collaboration with the other cities. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And just for you to know, thanks also to Lauren for her graphic recording. You will see the graphic recording of today's second session tomorrow in the morning at the beginning.
Good morning.
tomorrow in the afternoon at the very beginning, as we are starting sharply at 2:00, and I hope that you will be with us again tomorrow when we're speaking about sustainable housing and the new forms of sustainable housing construction. Thank you for joining us, and everybody for the intensive debate, and see you tomorrow, I hope.